What is the point of writing? What is the point of reading, or watching a movie, or even telling a story to a friend? Why does any of this matter, and why do we tell stories in the first place? There's a good argument for wanting to entertain or be entertaining in the first place. And I think there's a strong argument to be made here. Although, the more I look into stories and study how we tell stories and why we tell stories, there appears to be something more than just the entertainment value. Because to be entertained means to feel something and experience something. There might also be the desire for escapism, to be transported out of one's reality and into a new world or another character's life. But through both of these explanations and justifications, there is a commonality amongst them. At the heart of a story, in any medium, there is emotional resonance. The ability of a writer or storyteller to take you from one place or feeling and bring you along into something else entirely. Experiencing and living through another person's reality is nothing short of magical. And in a way, it is a bit. We use clever tricks to make the reader invested in our characters and filled with wonder within our worlds. We take deliberate actions to invoke emotional responses when and where we want. Characters may be the vessel our readers and viewers enter into, and the plot might be the path we take them down. But the point of everything, the reason why they are here now, and why we are telling them this story at this time with these characters, comes down to the theme. Making a story that a reader, a viewer, or even a player can resonate with is, at its barest derivatives, the point. When we are telling a story, we are trying to convey something. We want the audience to feel something. We want them to laugh when there's a joke. We want them to cry when their favorite character's heart gets broken. And we want them to feel something even after they turn that final page. The first thing that we want to ask ourselves when we are coming up with the themes of our story is, what are the central questions and the distilled essence of your story? When we think of the story that we are trying to tell, we have to consider the central message. We need to ask ourselves what angle or stance we're trying to take and what we want the audience to walk away with. And this can come in many different forms or on many different topics, with theme being a broad, sweeping term. We can use theme to challenge traditional norms, portray universal truths, reinforce traditional norms or untraditional norms, and even make our entire story some sort of motif. An example of a strong stance or message that manifests itself into a central theme is Frank Herbert's Dune. Dune is an excellent example of maintaining a grand overarching theme, actually themes to be specific, of a story while also juggling and introducing sub-themes that stem off of and even build into the main theme. But what's been stated before by the author is that the central idea of Dune and the grand theme mostly has to do with being wary of charismatic leaders.
Don't trust leaders to always be right. I worked to create a leader in this book who would be really an attractive, charismatic person for all the good reasons, not for any bad reasons. Then power comes to him. He makes decisions. Some of his decisions made for millions of people, millions upon millions of people, don't work out too well.
There are also other major themes that have to do with free will, prophecy, destiny, and what all this means in relation to prescience. However, there are some interesting sub-themes that at sometimes take center stage, but also give breath to some really interesting character moments and plot points. Some of those include juggling or deconstructing what it means to be considered human and what self-identity really is. This is portrayed between Duncan Idaho and Hate. There are also many sub-themes that have to do with the purpose of technology and the role that it plays in our lives. And we see this represented in a world that is lacking supercomputers or major computer devices, and instead inhabiting the mentats, as well as the pre-events that were titled the Butlerian Jihad. But aside from looking at some of these examples of how themes have been implemented into Dune, the main point is that we want to figure out the different angles that we can take when we think of our grand themes and how those can impact the characters and the cast that we have. This will also help us choose the direction we want to go with our plot. and the overall pacing of our story and the different characters' arcs. As I've said in the past, there's a very strong synergy between plot, characters, and themes. All three of these generally help influence and guide one another, plugging in and playing off of each element. And we can see this synergy play out on a smaller scale in a film like Interstellar. I'm going to revisit this later, but one of the most interesting parts of writing your theme is the way you, the writer, and you, the audience, can interpret a piece of media. The two different parties, the creator and the consumer, can come up and receive entirely different meanings from a piece of media. Neither one of these are wrong necessarily, but it does make the list of themes we can explore and general themes almost endless. And I would argue that having a list of themes or themes that are explored in media is, in a way, pointless. There's not really any defined borders or boundaries to theme. And oftentimes, if we deliver a theme too clearly, it can turn off our audience. But that's really besides the point, and more of just a slight caveat before we look at how Interstellar's themes of love and time play such a fundamental role in the film. It really does make it a great example of the synergy between our plot, our characters, and our themes. Because if we zoom back and we think of the plot as a whole, Interstellar isn't really that extraordinary. Neither are the characters or the themes alone. If any one element is considered extraordinary for Interstellar, it might be the portrayal of the science understood at that time. But science aside, what makes Interstellar so compelling and such an acclaimed film is the combined effort of plot, characters, and theme. In each character, we see the manifestation of this concept of time and love. This theme shaping and giving our characters their own motives to explore the different angles of this theme. Similarly, in the plot, we experience the arc of each of these elements, seeing them play out and impact the story's core. To illustrate this, let's take a look at some of the characters featured in the film. First, we can look at Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey. Cooper's flawed love for his daughter drives him away from her, but eventually allows him to communicate beyond both space and time. We see the manifestation of this play out when he goes to the surface of the planet that's too close to a black hole. And when he returns, it turned out that he missed significant portions of his family's life. The scene is tragic, but really gives us an understanding of the sacrifice Cooper's making for humanity, but also kind of the flawedness, him abandoning his family for seemingly a greater good or a greater cause. And we can also look at the other character, Brand. Brand's love for Wolf Edmund is the motivation to choose Edmund's planet, despite him having died long before they arrive. Her love is what drives her to travel beyond space and beyond time. This desire, this feeling of love being a thing that communicates beyond the vastness of space. Her character is really the most optimistic take of this theme. And then there's Man, whose name might be a motif. Man represents the love loss for humanity and wanting to save himself over humanity. In one scene, there is a very tragic duality portrayed when Man is betraying Cooper to save himself. And in a separate scene, Cooper's family is on Earth debating on leaving their home and living or staying and dying. Man has felt what it means to be alone and thus chosen to lie and possibly sacrifice the rest of humanity to save himself. In addition to this scene, the tragic realization of Cooper rushing away to save humanity while leaving behind his family is truly compounded by his daughter saying, "If you're not going to go, save your family." Brother responds about their father, where then she replies, "Dad's not coming back. He's never coming back." Each of these elements in Interstellar, the plot, characters, and themes, on their own have probably all been done before, many times, and might even be a bit cliche in an isolated instance. But together, put in the correct order, and woven in a specific way, gives way to something much greater than each individual part. Integrating the theme and having them echo throughout your characters, your plot, and your setting is how we can create something truly original and magnificent.
Don't judge me, Cooper. You were never tested like I was. Few men have been.
Okay, so we've thought of our theme and how it might play a role in our characters, our setting, and our plot. But this alone isn't exactly going to be enough to fully flesh out and give our theme an original feel. During the outlining or brainstorming portion, we are usually going to look at key points in our story and in our plot, mapping on the progression of our plot and our character's arc. While we're doing this, this is probably going to be the most skeletal feature or look at our outline. It doesn't have to be super detailed, but it's usually a good idea to have something in play when we consider how we want to implement this next phase of our theme. Because in this phase, we will start mapping out different themes we want to explore throughout the arc of the story. And in all honesty, this will probably follow the progression of your main character's character arc, as it makes the most sense that when our character changes, those are going to be some of the biggest highlights of our theme, or the biggest points in which our theme comes into play. Along the way, we're going to want to add roadblocks, testing and poking at our main themes while also teasing out our sub-themes if we have them. And during this outlining and brainstorming portion, we can start to think of all of the different positions and stances that someone might have about that central theme. In the past, I've used the idea of true love or love being real in response to different types of character arcs. But as an example, let's use the theme, the existence of free will. With this theme, we can think of all the different nuances, stances, factions, beliefs, and opinions that someone or a group of people might hold about this theme. Doing this will help create opportunities for tension between characters and give way to different roles characters can play within our story. Just to name a few of these roles, we have a character or characters that are in opposition to our theme or stance, that might be allied to it, those that might contradict it, the truth tellers, the liars, the manipulators of this stance, and of course the foil. This doesn't name every dynamic, but it does cover them broadly. So maybe after we come up with a couple of different positions or stances and we arrive at our final overarching theme, free will and personal agency exist over predetermination and divine destiny, which so happens to be the main theme of Knights of the Old Republic 2, which just so happens to also contain one of my favorite foils of all time, Kreia. And I do want to talk a bit about the foil and how they as a character device and literary device can help you better understand the themes that you are exploring. We can use foils to service the plot, but what I think is oftentimes more interesting is having them service the theme, or at least challenge the theme. And what I would argue is that the foil might actually be the most important theme-based character at our disposal, as they will act as reflection points, countering your main theme, creating tension, and playing overall this personification of the devil's advocate. Now, this character should be more than just that, but at its barest bones, this character will be a source of thematic conflict and even some tension. In our example of the Star Wars: The Knights of the Old Republic 2, Kreia plays many different literary roles, being both the antagonist and a mentor figure, while also being a thematic foil. Without getting into too much of the main plot or the story or the game itself, Kreia, in all intents and purposes, is quite literally bonded to you, the player. Despite the physical mechanics of the game, in Star Wars lore in general, always alluding to the light and dark side of the Force, Kreia represents and pushes for the player to fall into some sort of gray category, rejecting the polarity of the Force. She also rejects the predetermination that the Force generally alludes to, and later in the game wants to completely destroy the Force. Narratively though, Kreia becomes a foil and a sounding board for many of the dialogue options throughout the story. She contradicts and speaks to many of the themes that are present in the game, most of which concern the Jedi's role and the role of the Force in the galaxy. The conversations you have with her are some of the most interesting philosophical and moral questions I've seen portrayed in a video game, and by far the most interesting philosophical questions I've seen portrayed in the Star Wars universe. She quite literally challenges the ideas and tests the player's philosophical understanding of the Star Wars universe. A major goal of hers is to destroy the Force and give free will to the galaxy. She is neither good nor evil, denouncing both the light and the dark side, and encouraging you, the player, to see the world as such, which actually goes in contradiction to the mechanics of the game that have a reward system in place for choosing either light or dark. No one wants to be told how to feel, nor told what they believe is the point of a story isn't the point of a story. The foil becomes a very useful character in testing the limits and angles of your theme, letting your audience interpret the story in whatever way they interpret it as. Sometimes the takeaways can be surprising and more interesting than the creator's intention.
I am but a mirror whose only purpose is to show you what your own eyes cannot yet see.
Everything up to this point will take place outside of actually writing your story. Some of the concepts you'll take forth and implement while you're actually writing, but the integration of your theme is something that can often require a bit more of a subtle touch. Being too heavy-handed with our messages will often appear ham-fisted and be very unappealing to your audience. We can all probably think of a book or movie that quite literally spelled out the themes of their story without leaving anything to interpretation. These usually don't land very well and can often be very polarizing for an audience. Not in a good way, though not entirely in a bad way either. But the best way to subtly introduce your theme is trying to find the synergy between your characters, your plot, and your themes, as this will give the theme a much more natural and purposeful feel when it is put onto the page. But let's look at some examples of how this was done and in ways this was done correctly. The Last of Us. Mostly I'm going to be talking about the TV show for the examples here, as it is probably more focused and more direct to their themes than the video games are. Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann have both spoken about capturing the essence of the video game and carrying that through and implementing it into the TV show. And the essence that they spoke of capturing is, to nobody's surprise, love.
Hi, I'm Troy Baker, and I'm the host of HBO's The Last of Us podcast. And I also play Joel in The Last of Us video game, number 1. This is not a show about zombies. This is a show and a story about love. It's a story about two people that are both lost, that find each other, and how they make their way through this world.
Looking at our primary character, Joel, he really does embody the fatherly aspect and protector aspect of love. Joel's whole character arc is tied to this growing bond between him and Ellie, and the role that he plays for Ellie, as well as him trying to get over the loss of his daughter. Joel shows us the violent lengths we are capable of going through for loved ones and in the pursuit of love. This becomes more and more clear as the plot goes on and towards the end of the show, mostly centering around the final episodes. One being the encounter at the cannibal camp and the other at the Firefly base. The game highlights this as well, as the player takes on a literal protector role, killing hordes of infected and people. And even beyond just Joel, each of the side characters reflect the theme of love and the lengths that each of us will go in pursuit of love. We see this in Frank and Bill's relationship, between Riley and Ellie, between Henry and Sam, and even in Kathleen's warpath. Each character in some way or another either reflect the main theme, provide a counterfoil, or a different angle to this central idea. This theme really manifests itself in the general progression of the story, with more and more obstacles and roadblocks being put up in the way for Joel's role to protect Ellie and his love for Ellie. We, the player, and Joel, the character, become more and more attached to Ellie, as well as Joel and Ellie's relationship. As we get closer to the plot's final destination, the harder we fight and the greater this bond becomes between Joel and Ellie. We see the lengths and feel the tension of this inevitable ending. And when we reach that ending, whether we agreed with Joel or not, we understand and empathize with him in his own warpath and his decision to save Ellie and not humanity. Setting can sometimes be tricky. We can use our setting to act as a general motif or symbol of our themes. However, more often than not, the setting will often be more of an amplifier for the characters and themes within the story. In The Last of Us, the setting acts more of an obstacle to Joel's love for Ellie, and also is the reason and the launching off point for our theme in general. The whole reason for Joel's arc is because of the setting and what has happened to this world. The thing to key in here is that the synergy that plays between plot, character, setting, and theme not only helps amplify each other, but it also should answer the point and show that this story couldn't exist without this setting, this character, this plot, or this theme. The combination of all of those and the implementation makes that story original and all the more powerful. And the integration of your theme into each of these elements can be a really fun way to make your story feel deeper and give it thematic weight. It is a great way to have your audience feel a deeper sense of immersion and give more meat for them to grab onto and invest their time in. There will be opportunities for them to say that aha, for them to piece together the motives of the different characters, and for them to feel that every moment means something, and that you gave them a thematic and emotional experience.
I'll see you around.
Yeah.
And finally, we enter the motifs and symbols and this sort of final conglomeration of thematic elements. Specifically, though, I want to talk a bit about motifs. Motifs are an interesting element that we can use to add another layer to our theme and story. Sometimes a motif can simply just be a character's name, and sometimes be the entirety of a story. We can use motifs to create a greater sense of depth to our story, adding meaning to different names and places, and even provide Easter eggs to the audience members that are paying attention. These will often reinforce our main theme and be the breadcrumbs that we leave throughout our story, leading them to the central idea or point. Motifs can be helpful to create connection points between scenes, characters, plot moments, all within the context of our theme. To name a couple of examples, we have Dune, with betrayal being a motif that's played off of, especially in the books. At the start of the novel, Paul is betrayed for having his back to a door, allowing people to sneak up on him. This occurs throughout the books, with characters being described in relation to different doors. Dr. Yen had his back to a door, foreshadowing his betrayal by the Baron, and Paul has his back to a door when the Sardaukar attack him and Jessica. Similarly, Paul says to Hoyt for the last time, "As you can see, my back is to no door," which is responded with, "The universe is full of doors," emphasizing that he will never be safe from betrayal. We can look back at Interstellar with Dr. Man, his name being a motif for the flaw of man, the desire of self-preservation. And then throughout the Star Wars universe and in Knights of the Republic, you of course have the light and dark side of Force being the source of good and evil. And then finally, you have The Last of Us, more specifically The Last of Us Part 2 in the video game. In the video game, Joel sings Future Days that is later sung at the end of the game. However, there is a bit of a twist when Ellie tries to play it at the end. The lyrics of the song reflect really well the relationship and dependency between Ellie and Joel. Motifs can be a really fun thing to play around with, and us as the creator often can hide things in plain sight that relate directly to the themes, the plot, or the overall story. Next time you're reading a book or watching a film, see if you can identify any motifs that are left behind. I think the best part of the theme is that it doesn't necessarily need to be interpreted by your audience, and they can differ from different perspectives. Now, even in saying this, that doesn't mean that theme isn't important. There still needs to be a theme there or some sort of message there. And what's also really interesting is that commonly what the creator thinks their story is about and what the consumer thinks the story is about might be entirely different. Even in some of the examples I used today, some people might read into different stories and have interpreted them completely different than myself. And what's also interesting is that you, the creator, or the creator in general, can keep this a mystery and never tell anyone what that story actually means or what it is actually about. And this can still resonate with people. Many creators have said, oftentimes stating what your intention was for a story often takes away the mystery of it. But that doesn't mean that that story didn't mean something to them in the first place.
That's one of my things. Whether or not the audience knows about it, I know about the character's past, and I just want the actors to know. Now, the audience doesn't need to know. Like, for instance, Brad Pitt's character, Aldo Rain, has a rope burn.
Exactly.
Around his neck. But I never wanted to explain how it happened.
I desperately wanted to know.
Well, I want you to just figure it out, all right? I mean, it's up to you to supply where that rope burn came from. I like the idea that if you contemplate why there is a rope burn there, and somebody else contemplates why there is a rope burn there, and somebody else contemplates it, and three different people come up with three different reasons why he got a rope burn, those are three different movies you all saw. And I like that idea. I like the idea that you open up the briefcase in Pulp Fiction, and I don't tell you what's in there, but it's up to you to figure out what's in there, and now that's your movie. And you'll make that decision somewhere down the line. Now, if I tell you at this table what it is, then you'll throw that away, and I don't want you to throw away. That's your movie.
And in a way, I tend to agree. I myself have always been an advocate for ambiguous stories with ambiguous endings or ambiguous themes. Some of the best books or movies or even video games that I've finished in the past are ones that I've walked away and wondered, what is the meaning behind X? And upon further reflection, I come up with what that meant to me. If I would have gone to the writers or the creators and they told me, no, you have it all wrong. It's about this or it's about that. That may have ruined part of it for me in a certain way. But after all, when it comes to telling a story or consuming one in some way, we want to be able to feel something, to be connected to something. There is a central point to every story, and having a theme that resonates is why we tell the stories that we tell. Because the point of telling stories and the point of stories will always come back to its theme.